Good morning, everyone. I'm Rick Sterling from Western IM. As many of you know, we've been running, Western IM has been running our Learn With Us sessions for the last 3 years, approximately now, and all about the kind of learning for those of us in the records and information management community. We kind of determined that a lot of people were interested, but not exactly up to speed yet with AI, the AI side of things, and we felt that it was kind of going to be with us now for the rest of our careers, for all of us. So we needed to dive a little bit deeper into that for sure. We did the first 2 sessions. If you haven't seen the first 2 sessions, you should go back and have a look at the recordings. The first session was done by one of our Western IM partners, Daryl Schrader, who did a very kind of introduction session on large language model AI things. Nothing to do with anything but that. It was just plain vanilla. Here's what it's all about, and it was a really great session. In fact, I learned a lot of things about it as well from Daryl when I watched the session myself. And then the second one, I did one on kind of our direction based on things we've done with AI and our journey to get AI included in our own tools, which I felt good trying to do that session to try and bring everybody up to what it's going to take and how some of that stuff's going to work actually in the end. Today on our third session, 3 of 4, we've asked Ken Oldenburger to be our guest today, and Ken agreed to come on and be with us. I probably don't need to introduce Ken a lot. Ken, most of you know anyway from ARMA across Canada and the ARMA region team and other things that we've been on over the years. I consider Ken one of the best classification people in the country. So I kind of wanted Ken on because some of this relates to classification a lot. This AI topic relates to classification, and we needed Ken's brain to be on here as part of the panel discussion. And everybody that's been on our sessions before knows Troy Sawyer. Troy's my partner that deals with development at Western IM. He's the director of development at Western IM. There is a chat at the bottom of the screen if you have a question, and this is very open. This is going to be a very open session. We want dialogue today. Put a question in the chat anytime you feel like it. We'll come up and answer it. A lot of today, I hope we're going to be talking about use cases for RIM. I don't care about anything else. We're just talking about us, our community right now, and how AI might affect us and impact us in days to come. So that's where we're going to go today. At the end of today's session, or not at the end of today's session, but tomorrow, you'll get a survey from with some AI questions on it on the survey, and I hope you will spend the time to answer. It's not going to be like one of those click the yes, click the no, do it in 30 seconds kind of things. It's more of a trying to get dialogue from everybody on AI topic. And then in the 4th session, which happens on the 17th, we're going to be going over the answers to the AI survey that everybody did and continuing on with our discussion about use cases and things like that. Again, an open dialogue, ask the questions, get answers, and everybody can raise their kind of learning level on the AI side of things going forward. So without going any further myself, Ken, you got some things you'd like to maybe give us a bit of a talk at the start of this?
Yeah, so I think first, I am seeing quite a few names that I don't recognize, so I'll just say real quickly that I'm a consultant. I've been doing records management for about 28 years, plus a couple of years before that, so kind of almost about 30 years altogether. And that's been working on assessments, policies, classification systems, implementations, training, records management manuals, forms, almost everything except implementation of EDRMSs. So, and for all kinds of organizations, First Nations, municipalities, provincial government, mines, all over the place. And I'm based out here in Victoria. Yeah, so I'm going to start with just kind of a few statements, kind of my initial impressions and feelings and thoughts about AI. And then hopefully we'll have a bit of a discussion back and forth. So I want to start out, you saw me do AI. I don't like the term AI for what we're talking about. I definitely prefer calling it a large language model. And if you go back to Daryl's presentation, the first presentation, it was an excellent summary. So if you haven't seen that one, I highly recommend you go back and watch through that one. That will give you an excellent foundation on how to think about this squirrely concept of AI. So if we speak about a large language model, it's kind of like the current iteration of software. It's nowhere close to being Skynet, like Musk and Woz were scaremongering. It's just not. Basically, they had some an AI talking back to somebody, and the AI was responding in ways that mimicked emotion, and so people freaked out. And it's like it's just silly. It's mimicking a language model. And that's what we're talking about here is its extreme ability to look at language, to recognize language, and to make associations within that language model. Basically, it's a sophisticated word association software. Now, obviously, that's oversimplifying, but I think it helps us to kind of get a picture of what the large language modeling is, as opposed to what it isn't. Yeah. So I think we all recognize that language is the fuel that powers records management careers. And this large language modeling, like Rick was saying, is going to provide us with opportunities and tools that we've never thought about before. So that's a lot of what we want to talk about today is this concept going into the future. Now, before we go into the future, we should probably look a little bit into the past. So in the past, we had machine learning, and machine learning was a step on the way of AI. If you go do some research, there's all sorts of steps, beginning with like the Turing test from Alan Turing, all the way up to kind of machine learning, which sort of broke into the world in the early 90s. I remember when I first got into ARMA back in 2003, machine learning had already been around for like 10 years, and it was hitting records management, and people were going, oh, machine learning is the be all end all. Well, they'd already been trying machine learning in records management for, well, Rick can talk about this better than I can, but it had already been around for at least a decade by the time that I joined ARMA in 2003. And the machine learning was like, oh, this is going to solve our problems. It's going to do auto classification. But when you start digging into it back then, it was a very clumsy, very expensive piece of software that it took a long time to train the software. Basically, you had to put in an invoice, and you'd have to tell it, this is an invoice, this is where you find the invoice number, this is where you find the vendor, this is where you find blah, 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 blah. And then after all that training, it had a classification accuracy of not great. I don't want to throw numbers out, but it was definitely less than 70%, probably closer to about 50% with all that work. Only large organizations could afford it. So medium sized or less, forget it. Because it was just too expensive, too time consuming, all that sort of stuff. So really that really wasn't a solution. All right. So now we're in the age where we have this large language model. And Troy and Rick have convinced me that with the proper foundational, with thinking about how to do the process, we can get the accuracy up to about 95%, maybe even a little bit more. And that is a game changer, especially since it can be done for any size organization. I'm just the possibilities are incredible. And so here is where I want us to start thinking outside the box. I used to be a very good outside the box thinker, but I'm in my late 50s and I'm starting to get a bit of a crusty brain. So we need to put our minds to this and kind of really think about it. Now, Rick and I have banged our heads together, and Troy has thrown in some stuff, and Daryl and Brian as well, kind of going, okay, what are some of the things that we can focus on using a large language model? All right. Actually, let's step back. Let's talk about what we think the foundational elements are that are necessary to do good language modeling. So if we're thinking about records management, what we want to have is, as was already mentioned in the other sessions, there's an API, an application, something or interface, which keeps the data that you have, the information that you have, from going into the AI and staying in there. So there's a firewall, basically. So you don't get your confidential information or your personal information into that system. So that firewall is important from the get-go. Now we talk about what kinds of elements are necessary to really make the process as efficient, to try and get to that 95%. What do we need? First of all, you really need to have a clear and simple classification system as much as possible. And I'm going to toot my own horn here, because a broad functional classification system is definitely the easiest one that could fit this process. Other ones that have policies scattered across multiple classifications, planning across multiple classifications, agreements and contracts across multiple classifications, is going to confuse the AI. Now, there's ways around it, but those ways around it take more wording, take more complexity, and add more to the thickness, let's call it, of the classifications system. So we want the classification system to be as lean. Sorry, I have fruit flies. Get out of here. As lean, but as relevant as possible. Yeah, and there's reasons for that, which I won't go into unless we want to come back and circle to that. So yeah, keywords in the classification system, they get used as metadata elements within the categories. So for example, you have a secondary, and then you'll have what kinds of records will we find in here, what kinds of processes are reflected in this secondary, that sort of thing. Making sure that there's no overlaps or gaps within the classification system. And that's where things get tricky for an AI. All right. And then so you have the classification system, you have the document, which is protected by that AI, by the API. Sorry, too many acronyms. And that is essentially what you need in order to start the auto classification. I do think that it would be helpful, and Rick and I disagree on this, so we'll have a conversation about this later. I believe that it will be helpful to have a pre-designed structure, whether you're in SharePoint or on ShareDrive still, or wherever you're at, have a structure which is laid out, which has the classifications associated with those, with that structure. Okay, because I think that the AI would, I'm thinking in human terms, be more comfortable finding a place for it rather than just assigning a classification code to an individual document. All right. So that's kind of like the foundational stuff. So keep that in mind, because we can come back to this and talk more about it. It's the API, the classification system, lean and mean, the documents themselves. And I think that a structure, a pre-existing structure is maybe not necessary, but definitely helpful, in my opinion. Okay, so now let's start throwing out some uses. Rick has already mentioned a few of these, but we'll repeat them. We'll summarize and then expand on some other ones. A really big one is document cleaning prior to implementation or migration. So how many people here are involved in a migration from shared drives to SharePoint? Would you like to have those documents cleaned up before you go? You might even be able, well, anyways. So there's also that's one, cleaning prior to implementation or migration. Number two, auto classification during implementation or migration. And I think that is the biggest one for us. If any of you have gone through an implementation project, you know how labor intensive it is, especially once you crack open that shared drive and you start rooting around in there and you realize that you've got not 10,000 documents, you've got 200,000 documents. And most of them you're going to have to look at and touch and read and move. Extremely time intensive. And therefore, it's expensive. Unless you hire a summer student, in which case your accuracy goes down the hill. So that is the really big one. And that's the one where most of us, where our minds go to automatically, is auto classification during implementation or during a migration. All right. But then there's a big one, and Rick definitely touched on this one before. That's auto classification during active operations. So we're living our lives, we're creating emails, we're making documents, we're receiving documents. These things come in, we put them in a folder, or we put them in the process, and they get auto classified. They get, hopefully, in my opinion, put in the right spot, so it's easy to find them back. And this is where I'm starting to think outside the box. So yes, documents, emails, great. But now I start thinking about social media. We have never gotten a handle on social media properly. We've never got a handle on text properly. I know of several organizations where the maintenance folk are given their work orders by text. So they run over to, the swimming pool and they check the chemical composition. Then they're running over to the other building and checking the boiler and things like this. So capturing those texts may be an important thing, or at least being able to auto classify them. I'm sure there's things that I'm forgetting on this one. I mean, maybe even websites, but hopefully those are just transitory. What other kinds of things can we look at? Auto classification of legacy records. So you got a big pile of archive in your shared drive. It'll eat through those things like nobody's business. Orphaned SharePoint sites. I'm sure all of us have a couple of those hanging around. So being able to eliminate those quickly and easily and consistently would be fantastic. Old information systems. So you got a half a dozen access databases. Well, it can literally go through those databases and make sense out of them with the right parameters. So if we say to the large language model, this is kind of what we're expecting to see here, go at it, or it can do an exploratory run, and then you look at the data and then you refine it and send it back through again. It's some powerful processing ability there. One of the things that Rick and I really twigged to when we were having a little conversation was we've got all these scanning projects where the names that are on the scans are incorrect, or it says scan 006235, meaningless, completely meaningless. And I've seen probably about 6 or 8 of those projects that are just sitting there, and they've never been OCR'd, they've never been properly managed, and somebody paid a lot of money to get all these scans. The AI can go through those. We can get them OCR'd, turned into PDFs if they're not PDFs already, and then classified, and even given a file name if we set up the parameters again. So that is a pretty powerful one. And in the past, my recommendation to these folks was throw it away and start over, because it's just garbage unless we go through each and every single one of these and figure out what's in them. Well, the AI can now do that with such speed and accuracy, potentially, that it's pretty exciting to be able to rescue some of these like $30,000 scanning projects that are just sitting there. All right. Another one that I came up with, which is pretty exciting to me, is being able to go through all of last year's legal legislation and regulations and seeing which impact your records management. So if the AI can read through all these, all the new legislation and all the amendments to the legislation, it can identify all this sort of stuff. So that's actually a really interesting question, Carolyn. So I've been focusing on the language model side of things. Images are a different creature. And I don't know, I haven't really put my thought into can scans of images or photos, because photos are another big bugbear when it comes to trying to figure out what's what. Yeah, maybe images could be done. We'd have to put our heads to it.
I could speak to that a little bit, just to
jump in.
So there has been a number of new AI systems that do handle images and are very good at being able to provide contextual information about image documents. And actually, as of 11 o'clock last night, I've been actually implementing some of that in our software now. OpenAI had their dev day yesterday, and now the API layer can now take those images. And nothing's really stopping us from providing our classification, like Ken's been talking about, providing the image in this case instead of a document, and seeing what comes out of that kind of classification. Now, it's still early. I haven't actually pushed the button on some images yet, but my understanding here is that we should be able to handle images provided we have a classification that's appropriate for the type of images we'd be giving it.
So here's a question. Because quite often, if we're talking about a photo, we usually won't have much text with it. If we're lucky, we're going to have some GPS, possibly an individual's name. But that's when I cross my fingers and I hope we have a GPS in a person's name. If we don't, usually what we would do is we would rely on documentation that was adjacent to the image and kind of go, oh, this is a permission for this image, or this was the project that they were on when they took this image. So how would that connect in to identifying that image and classifying it?
So what we usually try to do is provide more contextual information around what we provide into the system. So the best example I can give is a folder path. So it's a Christmas party from last year. We provide that as part of the information we give to the system to help it classify. So not just randomly just given an image and try to a picture of Troy sitting on Santa's knee and make that fit into my classification structure. It's that it was stored in a certain place, or there's more contextual information around the image we try to provide to the system as well.
Right. So it would recognize things like a Christmas tree and Santa Claus and a boy sitting on a knee and things like that. So it can give some metadata around, that's really interesting.
And then doing something like in the classification where you have company events, it would be able to classify that as a company event document or record.
And it would either be social or it would be an event.
Whatever.
Business. Interesting. Excellent question, Carolyn.
Yeah, Ken, I just wanted to thank you for my not even having to be here today, because you pretty much covered all the topics I wanted to talk about in the first 15 minutes you were on there. Angela Burns has her hand up too, and I wanted to ask Angela if she still had her hand up and would like to.
I can allow you to talk, Angela, if you want to unmute.
No, sorry, I don't see that I've got my hand up. I apologize.
No, that's okay.
Yep.
I just didn't want to leave you there with your hand up if you had something you wanted to add to the conversation.
Yeah.
This is a conversation we're all going to be stuck with for the rest of our careers now in the records and information management business, because this is all relevant to what we do every day. Ken, I wanted to say I don't have fruit flies, but everything else was absolutely bang on.
Well, I've got a few questions that might spark some more information or questions as well. And I did have one more comment that I wanted to make before I shut up. And that is that I think we need to start thinking now about policies and procedures for artificial intelligence and language models. Because I mean, remember email came in, we had nothing, and it steamrolled us. Social media came in, we had nothing, it steamrolled us. SharePoint came in, we had nothing. Teams comes in, we got nothing. And now AI is here and we've got nothing. So even if we just have some motherhood statements protecting our butts to start with, try not to get into the weeds, because I tried to write a SharePoint sites policy about 8 years ago, and I could not get it finished because I kept getting into the weeds too much. So I think this is something that could be valuable. All right.
I wanted to add value, Ken, to what you said about that whole concept of structure. And what I probably hadn't told you was that we actually added in the early stages of this whole adding AI into the tools thing, we actually added a thing we called autofile into our email pointer application, which is where the thought was that somebody could just drag and drop an email or a document or whatever in there, and it would try to put it away in the folder in the right way. And of course it worked fine as long as the folder structure was really well done. Like when you got junk, a folder system that looks like junk, the AI system goes, I don't know what this is or where this ought to go. Let's just call it emails from July of 2023 or something like that. I mean, it just doesn't know what to do with it. But when you had a folder structure that was good, i.e., let's say a project folder structure that made sense all the time, and you dragged and dropped something on top of that, well, then it would try and put it away in the right kind of place because it had something to go on. But if the folder structures were junk, which many users have junky folder systems, of course, we all know, it's not going to fly. So I do agree with you that if you want to make those kind of things stick, you do need some kind of, you have to work with the users and try and figure out a folder structure that's going to fit properly for them.
Well, Rick, I thought we were going to have a fight here.
Well, I didn't
think dramatic.
They were going to get a records management structure. They were going to get a folder structure, Ken. So and our stance really has always been the users want to put things in a place that's corporately acceptable for them. So they want to put invoices in a vendor folder, or they want to put project information in a project folder or whatever. And we want it to be in an actual records management classification structure. And they didn't want to ever do that. So that was always our stance, was there may have to be two structures then, the one the users need and the one that we need for records and information management as well.
Right.
Now we can fight.
Okay. I think the two can be one. Marion Valines was a genius at sitting down with departments or creating a folder structure that worked for both records management and for the department. So it can be done. It takes a bit of planning. It takes a bit of negotiation and work. Yeah.
I would also say, Ken, that the first time I tried to put let me not call it artificial intelligence. An artificial intelligence engine was bolted originally onto the old Foremost system, which was the first electronic records management system in the world, Bruce Miller's system that we worked with back in the 90s. And they had worked with an artificial intelligence engine company at that time. They were next to them at a conference, and they bolted their artificial intelligence engine onto the Foremost application. And I tried to put one of those in 1997. So to add value to what you said about early days, like in 97, when you had to train the system to actually do that. So the process was you took a particular, in those days, it wasn't functional. It was block numeric classification system, which, as we all know, had in some cases thousands of classifications in them. And you take a bucket at the primary level, and you said, okay, here's what is going to go in here, and you dump documents in that related to that in there, and you trained it on those documents so it would know what they were. What a huge effort that was to try and train that functional or not functional, the block numeric classification system. And then it would come up and say, when you try to put something away, it would say, okay, this is X percentage of accuracy. Here's what I think it should be. Well, at the primary level, it was really great. It was up in some cases at 85, 75, 85%, which in those days was, I thought, pretty fabulous. Well, once it got down to secondary level, it dropped to like 40%. And it got down to tertiary, it was down at 15%. So it was completely useless if you really wanted to put things away and have them, get classified in a correct way. So exactly what you said, Ken. I had experience doing it in 1997, and I never tried it again after that. At least now with the large language models, we don't have to train the darn thing, right? That's such a huge bonus, is not having to go through that painful exercise of training a solution to deal with all that.
Which is what makes it accessible to small and medium-sized organizations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just to talk to that, actually, we did a demo yesterday where the training that we did was we classified a bunch of documents and found one that didn't fit in and didn't get classified. So what we did is we went into the scope notes and added waste management and recycling to one of the existing classifications to incorporate that type of document, let it run again, and then that document got picked up as that classification. So the only training we had to do was add additional information to the scope notes to say include these types of documents that we didn't initially account for.
So you tweaked that classification system to include the metadata that was necessary for the AI to understand what was going on.
Yeah.
So back to what you said earlier, Ken, about the necessity for having a really good, what I would call AI friendly classification system and scope notes. I think I can't say enough about that is the critical factor of making sure the AI is going to classify things in the right way, is having that classification system and the scope notes being accurate and correct in an AI friendly kind of way is going to be a big deal. And I can actually see that being like, we've had a lot of things we had to do when we did implementation, right, Ken? I mean, there's lots of pieces to that. Now I see the classification tweaking, right, being one of those most important things we have to do in a class in putting one of those together, because otherwise you're spinning your wheels with the AI in the first place to try and make it happen. And of course, what Ken didn't say was that when you do use an AI, it does cost money. It uses a thing called tokens when we submit to that API that Ken mentioned earlier, the document and the classification system and the scope notes and all that stuff it goes in through the API, so the large language model can deal with that properly. That all creates this kind of cost of tokens from the in this case OpenAI, because that's what we use as a source for that. And so it costs money to do that classification. So the more you do to help the AI system on the front end, the less it's going to cost on the token cost on the back end to make the AI work successfully.
And just to speak to that process a little bit more, in that when you're doing something like classification, if we are getting documents that are coming out of not being classified, that usually indicates some other thing too. Whether I talked about the whole idea of missing a classification, but this might mean that somebody's filing personal documents to your corporate drives. This might mean that people are putting, you run against a particular SharePoint site and you're finding finance documents in there, and you're like, well, finance documents are not supposed to be in here. So it can also be used not just to like, hey, let's do records management disposition on our electronic records. We can do things like managing our systems, even just by giving it these rules to run against the content of our repositories. Yeah.
So that just gave me another out of the box thought is, we kind of want to make sure that folks are doing things properly. You can use an AI for a super quick checking, just a run through, not at the level of an audit, but certainly a review. Are the records that are in this website, or not website, but in this site correct? Are there errors in here? Yeah.
Often what we'll do is a flag. It's give it the description of these documents should only contain financial documents. And if it's not a financial document, set a flag for us. And then we can see all those documents that are not financial documents that are in there. Yep. So it doesn't have to be as complex as a full classification. Yep.
People will ask too, in when we talk about this with people, they will ask, while it's doing the auto classification, can it also find out if there's personal information in the document at the same time?
Yep.
So can it then flag the document to say, hey, there's personal information in this document as well, and set a flag so that we have some way of being able to determine if there was a freedom of information request of some kind or something like that, that there is personal information in a document that came up as part of that situation. It also leads me into leads my head into a whole lot of other places that I've been asked over the last 25 years too, of can you do this? Can you do that? And of course, a lot of times it was like, not in the world are we ever going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
It's impossible. It's like somebody coming with a 400,000 document repository, shared drive repository, and saying, well, we have to move to SharePoint. Can we do this in a couple of months, prior to AI? And you go, are you joking? Like, we're talking years here. We're not talking weeks or months. We're talking years. And all the issues that go along with that. Like, that whole implementation thing used to just make me sad, because what everybody had to do was just impossible without busloads of people. And a lot of the subject matter experts we used to count on to help us with that kind of stuff are gone too. They've retired.
Yeah.
COVID knocked a lot of the really good subject matter experts out of a lot of organizations. And I think that's also a factor that plays into the use of AI a little bit more, because without those SMEs, we're just going to be really having a hard time trying to deal with a lot of this stuff, content.
Question here, would it help with legal holds? I'd say yes. So the kind of process of that would be, could you describe the documents you're looking for in natural language? As Ken was talking about earlier here, the idea of these large language models do really well with natural language. So if you can describe what you're looking for and have the AI system be given the document, it'll tell you yes or no, that based on your description, it fits that description or not. Yeah. And that's what our tools do, is not just do it kind of one at a time. We have it built so it does all that iterative processes and stuff for you. But yeah, that's the good thing about the large language model. If you can describe it, usually it does very well with it. Yeah.
I'm thinking back to some of you who are in the provincial government may remember the whole tobacco lawsuit, and how there was legal hold in BC on everything it was almost a decade.
Yeah.
So absolutely everything that was destroyed had to go through an extra step to put your hand to God and say, there's nothing related to tobacco in here. Now, if that had all been electronic and we'd had an AI to screen through it, Oh
Yeah,
my
right.
goodness.
Yep.
That
Yeah.
it would have been done in a year.
Yeah, I remember those days really well. A lot of the other it wasn't BC, it was other provinces that I was working with at that time.
Right. Yeah.
And they had everybody had the same issue, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
So I mean, again, this whole thing today, this whole session today, the thoughts I had about this whole session today was just to, brainstorm a bunch of us in the records and information management business, and just think about use cases and things that might be of value to us. And I'm looking at the names of the people on the session here, and most of us have been around in the business for a while. So I'm looking for thoughts that everybody has, and you can add those thoughts to the survey when we get that out tomorrow. Troy and I'll get that out tomorrow, but we'll go at this again in the fourth session a little bit deeper. So and by all means ask the question. If Troy's very deep into this, I'm not deep into this, but Troy actually is fairly deep into the integration side. So I see Joanne has her hand up.
Yeah, I can allow you to talk here if you want to unmute, Joanne.
Thank you. Sorry, I just had a bit of a complicated question, or it's more of a observation, perhaps. It's a question. So, I've been doing this for a long, long time too. I'm at Langara College, and we have the records management appraisal reports. That's what we call them. And it has, the record series, the record subseries, number and title, purpose statement, the record description, the retention schedule, and all that. And I was thinking, Rick, when you were talking about scope notes, that seems like a real rich repository to help the LLM kind of get to grips on the kind of records that an organization might be producing. And I'm just wondering, have you considered that, or is that somewhere content that you think might be of value to get started at might not be the be all and end all, but you know what I'm trying to say? It has a lot of content there.
So maybe
Well,
I'll jump on that. That
ahead.
is exactly what we're looking for. So that's that classification system that I was talking about. You may need to have to go through it and kind of glean and clean it as much as possible. So for example, the large language model, it really doesn't care about your retention period. So all the retention stuff can be left out, and just condense it down to what the category is, and then what we use to describe that category. There are a couple of questions that I have which are related to this sort of stuff, but that is actually the most important starting point, is what you just described.
Yeah, and just to talk to that a little bit more, what we often do here is that when we're working with the large language models, we don't let it make the decision. We give it the decisions it can make, right? So the example I gave last week was, you're not going to be very confident if you go to ChatGPT and say, write me a legal lease document, and take that and use it. Right. But what we do in our applications and things like that is we give it the list of things and the information to make a decision on. And when it returns something, if it doesn't fit into that classification, we don't just apply one that it thinks. We only work with the ones in the context of what you give. So that's why that classification category, scope notes kind of stuff is very important with what we do with the systems. Yep.
Thank you.
Good.
That was great. That was great. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of that, but that was good. Thanks, Joanne. I appreciate that. Anything? I mean, other.
Move you back down, Joy. So I just moved her so she was back in the regular audience.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. That's the kind of stuff we're actually looking for to talk about today, because I mean, I'm not a wizard like Troy at making all that stuff happen, and I just know from experience how painful it's been over the last 25 or 30 years in records and information management to try and make some of this stuff happen. Like, we're such a small group. Like, we live on a very small island. There's not many of us. And my numbers used to be when I thought about members in the US, ARMA members in the US, when I was on the international board, I always thought in terms of numbers of people that were in records management And usually down there, it was like one person per 1,000 employees. So the numbers were very small. Obviously, different kinds of industries had different kinds of numbers, but that was kind of a rule of thumb number I used for records management people. And I don't know, I don't, here in Canada, I don't see many organizations that have more than one or maybe two people maximum in records management. It's not really common to see that. We just can't do it on our own. It's impossible to try and do some of the stuff that we know we have to do, like cleaning up shared drives that are monumentally large in terms of numbers.
And messy.
Volume, yeah, the volume is huge on many times. We've had clients with 25, 30 terabytes of stuff, you know, and it just doesn't, there's no way you can do that manually unless you're doing some other method of getting that done.
I'm just having flashbacks to the email. Remember, we were at Kennecott and the one manager there had or was it the potash mine? He had something like 200,000 emails in his delete box, just sitting there. 200,000. He had almost 20 years worth of emails just sitting there.
Yeah, well, he was actually creating folder structures in his delete folder so he could manage his deleted emails. Yeah,
Wild.
I do remember that.
Perfect candidate.
There's another use case that keeps coming up every time I talk to somebody across the country. The email in a Exchange server, whether it's Exchange Online or whether it's in another kind of infrastructure, that comes up every time, is management of that email in those structures, because people have millions and millions and millions of emails. I was talking to somebody the other day about numbers of emails, and they, of course, in large organizations, they've got lots of people that have left the organization over time, and they still have all their email. Hundreds of people that have left the organization, and there's literally millions of dead emails in those containers. Some of them are records, obviously. So I keep telling everybody, just look at that sent folder. Sent folder is the big thing. That's where all the decisions are, is in the sent folder. So if you can deal with at least the sent folder, my stance on that is you can probably deal with some kind of linear way of dealing with the emails in the repository later. So if you can get your users to drag and drop email out somewhere, if that's the thing you can get people doing, and we can classify those, auto classify those, at least that way someday we can say, okay, we keep emails in the Exchange server for 2 years or 3 years, whatever the number is, and then we automatically get rid of them. So it's like use it or lose it. If you got an email, you're going to put it away somewhere. Otherwise, it's going to be gone. Because I don't know if you, but a lot of people keep emails because senior people keep emails because it's a historical reference system for them. It's a search mechanism.
Yep.
I don't know. I'm guilty as everybody else of doing that kind of thing, as Troy knows.
Yeah. Yep.
But that whole idea of handling of somehow dealing with email, I think, lends itself at some point, like Ken said on the text messages and things like that. It's the same kind of issue, right? It's a huge volume. Never been able to deal with it. People just walk away from it because they don't know how to deal with it now. I think we're going to be able to do something with that using the AI tools to assist in some kind of process to get rid of that old email as well.
Yep. Good. Well, we're getting close to the end of the hour. I don't know if we want to wrap up a little bit early and let people go, or do we have any other topics we want? Oh, Joanne's got another question. I'll allow you to talk here, Joanne. Go ahead. Go.
Sorry, I couldn't figure out, I'm not very good with Zoom, so I couldn't figure out how to put another chat. So I put something in the Q&A, which was basically, if you want to read it out, but basically it was what would be a good elevator pitch, if you found yourself with senior management or IT, to sell them on the idea of using an LLM to do a file migration. I mean, we're where everybody else is. We've got SharePoint. We want to deploy it. We've got a huge file share, terabytes of data, of content. And, what would you say to, to senior management to get them excited about using an LLM for this process?
Yeah, I can speak to
Well,
that. You want to work or?
I was just going to say that great question, Joanne. I mean, I get asked this question often. How do we get senior management to buy in? And I think the big deal for me with senior management is it's all about cost, right? I mean, it's usually about the bottom line and timing. Whenever you're doing a large migration like that, can we actually do it in any kind of rational time frame? And the answer right now, without AI in place, is no, we can't. There's no way we can deal with that size of volume, other than IT. And I'm going to apologize for saying this about IT because I am an IT guy. So I'll say this anyway. IT's rule is we lift and shift. We don't clean anything up. We just take whatever's there in one repository, we lift and shift it and put it in the new one. And that's my end of my job as an IT group, right? I did my job. We moved from shared drive to SharePoint. And we as records and information management professionals, we don't think about it like that. we think about, well, we got all this rot lying around in the servers. Like we have to clean up the rot, the redundant and outdated documents in there and get rid of it, transitory documents. And whether we do that now, and that's the only change I see in this whole discussion about AI, whether we do that now before we move it over to SharePoint or not is irrelevant to me at the moment. Meaning that if I can clean it up in a shared drive, I can also clean it up in a SharePoint site. Like with the AI tool, I can do it either way. I don't care. The only thing about it is my heart of hearts still says, man, we should clean this up before we actually shift it over, because a lot of times they're shifting the information out of an infrastructure on site, on-prem, and they're moving it to Azure or some kind of Microsoft cloud, to the 365 online. So I guess my selling point here from a management standpoint would be, if we clean it up to start with, we're only going to ship over half of what we have now over into that cloud environment, and it's going to cost the company way less money as we shift the stuff over. So that makes more sense to me, to get rid of it, the on-prem stuff, if we can, and move it over to the cloud after that. That's my 2 cents anyway.
Thank you.
I put a bit of a response in the Q&A, basically saying if you're a public body, FOI is much easier once it's cleaned up and you know what's what. Similarly, any organization that's experiencing a lawsuit would have the same benefits. And I wanted to finish by saying that's speculation, because we really need to get some test cases, some real world test cases under our belts, so we can really shake things out and see if what we're concluding is going to be real.
Right.
Yeah. Totally
agree. Yeah, that's going to be the big thing, is to do the benchmarks, enough benchmarks to know really what that's going to shape out like. I mean, we know, because we've done quite a few things already, that we have a pretty good idea what that shapes out like. But every site's different, every job's different, and it takes a little bit of time to kind of deal with that. The other thing is too, is the token cost isn't always fixed. Like I think right now we're thinking that the token cost runs, the way we're doing it now, runs about $3,000 per 100,000 documents of classification. Now, if you're doing more things, obviously, if you're doing more things than trying to auto classify, like you're looking for personal information, or you're doing other things, it's going to increase that cost because you're doing more than one job at the same time. It takes a little bit more token cost to get that done, but that's about the benchmark so far, is that kind of approximately $3,000 per 100,000 documents. And the other part of that is, Troy, what's our kind of current thinking on the speed of the auto classification?
It's really limited by the shared drive. So the IO, the disk are still limitation. It always has been for any migration or scanning or anything like that. And so that's around 3,000 to 8,000 documents an hour.
So think about that, though. We're talking about 3,000 documents an hour in a 24-hour day, because the AI is not going to care if it runs overnight. It's not like us, right? that wants to get a glass of wine and have a sleep, it'll keep going. So 3,000 documents an hour over 24 hours, man, we're talking about hundreds. Well,
Not quite 100,000.
yeah. I mean, holy smokes. Think about it.
Easily 10 to 100 times faster than a human being.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean,
Easily.
you know, it's always, Ken, I say this, I say this out loud. Every time I'd get into a client, we talk about stuff and they'd say, I want to clean up my shared drive. And I'd say, well, let's see what kind of stuff you've got in there. And once you saw the drive, you'd be going, oh
Yeah.
my God,
Yeah.
this is going to take years to clean this up. Because there was a process, right? You had to go
Yep.
talk to subject matter experts and you had to go through the process and you had to go through this and through that. And it was just a huge time consuming, never get it done kind of effort. And, you know, it's not like all of us don't have other jobs to do at the same time. Like we're like we only have one thing to do. No, that's not right. We're still dealing with paper. We're still dealing with, you know, the scanning projects. We're still dealing with all that other stuff too. It's like a never-ending load of things that take time. But at least now, I think some of the stuff that was just sheer painful experience is going to be reduced, and I think it's great.
Yeah, Joanne, I can unmute you again if you'd like. There you go. You can unmute.
Sorry, I was actually writing a chat again. I'm really excited about this. I'm actually getting close to the end of my career, you know, but I'm thinking maybe a few more years, and because I think the potential for this for these LLMs is so exciting, and I'm with all of you. I felt the pain of trying to think about a file share migration and looking at all those documents and going, well, no, that's not going to work.
Yeah, it's it makes your heart sad, doesn't it,
Yeah,
Joanne?
it makes my heart sad. That's exactly it. But I really like this, and I thank you guys so much for bringing this to my attention because I didn't even really know this was going on for RIM. So thank you very much.
Oh,
Appreciate you
you're
being here.
very
Yeah.
Very welcome.
Yeah, and make sure you fill out your survey when you get it, Joanne. Well, and be on next
Will.
week or the
Will do.
17th. The last one's on the
Yeah,
17th.
I'll give a link here for the registration for the next one. We already have that here.
Yeah, because I already have like about 4 questions for next time. So
Yeah, no, I think next one's going to be really a lot more interesting because it gives you a chance to stop and think about some of this stuff, and when you can come back and go, wait a second, I've had this happen to me before. How's it going to help me with that?
Put the Zoom link there for the registration in chat.
Well, I want to thank everybody very, very much for coming on, especially Ken, our very special guest today on the session, and Troy, as always, thanks so much for being with us on this. I know you got lots of better things, or not better things. You've got lots of other things you do on a regular basis. So really appreciate you being here, and I'm really excited about doing the 4th session and talking about it. So maybe there's other sessions after that we want to do based on the results of our 4th session.
Maybe.
So. We'll see you all hopefully on the 4th session.
Great.
Thanks very much, everybody, and nice to see all my friends on the session here too. You know who you are.
Thanks, everybody.
thanks.
Bye, everybody. Have a great week.